Inside your body there is an entire world that is not you, and yet it quietly shapes how you think, feel, and even decide. Trillions of microscopic organisms live within you. They are not invaders, they are not passengers. They are active participants in your biology. Together, they form what scientists call the microbiome. For most of human history, this hidden ecosystem went unnoticed. It was dismissed as background noise, bacteria to be eliminated, controlled, or ignored. But modern science has revealed something far more unsettling. These microbes communicate with your brain. They influence your mood, your stress levels, your cravings, and your behavior. They produce chemicals that affect how neurons fire. They may even play a role in anxiety, depression, and decision-making. Some researchers now describe the microbiome as a second brain, not because it thinks like you do, but because it processes information, sends signals, and alters outcomes in ways that feel disturbingly familiar. In this documentary, we will explore how the microbiome works, how it communicates with the nervous system, and why your sense of self may be less isolated than you believe. We will examine the science behind the gut-brain connection, the experiments that changed medicine's understanding of the human body, and the implications this hidden system has for health, identity, and free will. This is not alternative medicine, this is not speculation. This is mainstream biology, and it is rewriting what it means to be human. If you enjoy calm, long-form explorations of the hidden systems that shape our reality, consider subscribing for more documentaries like this. Because once you understand the microbiome, one question becomes impossible to ignore. Where do your thoughts really begin, and how many of them are truly yours? For most of human history, the body was imagined as a sealed system, a single organism directed by a single brain, acting through a single will. Everything inside was assumed to serve that central command. Anything foreign was treated as an enemy. That picture is wrong. Modern biology has revealed that the human body is not a closed system at all. It is an ecosystem, a living environment shared with trillions of microscopic organisms that are not human and never were. These organisms are bacteria, viruses, fungi, and archaea. They live on your skin, in your mouth, in your lungs, and most densely in your gut. Collectively, they are known as the microbiome. They are not rare, they are not marginal, they are not optional. In fact, microbial cells in your body rival and may even outnumber your own human cells. Their combined genetic material, the microbiome's genome, dwarfs the human genome by orders of magnitude. You carry far more microbial genes than human ones. This alone forces a reconsideration of what a human is. You are not a single organism in the traditional sense. You are a composite being, a host and a habitat at the same time. For decades, medicine treated this ecosystem as background noise. Bacteria were something to kill. Cleanliness meant sterility. Health meant absence of microbes. This approach saved lives in the age of antibiotics, but it also blinded science to a deeper truth. Most microbes in the human body are not harmful. They are essential. They help digest food your own enzymes cannot break down. They synthesize vitamins your cells cannot produce. They train your immune system to recognize threats. They protect against invasive pathogens by occupying space and resources. Without them, survival is compromised. But digestion and immunity were only the beginning of the story. As researchers began to map the microbiome in detail, something unexpected emerged. The gut, long considered a passive digestive tube, was buzzing with neural activity. Millions of neurons lined its walls. Chemical signals flowed constantly between gut and brain. This network became known as the enteric nervous system. It contains more neurons than the spinal cord. It operates largely independently of conscious control. It regulates digestion, secretion, and motility without instructions from the brain. For this reason, scientists began calling it the second brain. At first, this was a metaphor. Then the evidence grew. The microbes living in the gut were not just interacting with the digestive system, they were interacting with this neural network directly. They produced neurotransmitters, the same chemical messengers used by the brain: serotonin, dopamine, GABA, acetylcholine. In fact, the majority of the body's serotonin, a chemical deeply involved in mood and emotional regulation, is produced not in the brain but in the gut. This discovery was unsettling. Serotonin influences anxiety, happiness, motivation, and emotional balance. If most of it is produced in the gut, then the gut is not just supporting the brain, it is influencing it. Communication between gut and brain occurs through several pathways. The most famous is the vagus nerve, a massive neural highway connecting the brainstem to the digestive system. Signals travel along it constantly in both directions, but chemical signaling is just as important. Microbes metabolize food into compounds that enter the bloodstream. Some cross the blood-brain barrier. Others interact with immune cells that then signal the brain. Still others alter hormone levels that affect neural activity indirectly. The brain is listening, whether you are aware of it or not. This challenges a deeply rooted assumption that thoughts, emotions, and decisions originate solely in the brain. Instead, they appear to be distributed processes influenced by signals from throughout the body, including from organisms that are not you. Experiments began to reveal just how strong this influence could be. In controlled studies, researchers transferred gut microbes from one animal to another. When microbes from an anxious animal were transferred into a calm one, the recipient began to display anxiety-like behavior. When microbes from a depressed animal were transferred into a healthy one, changes in motivation and behavior followed. These animals had the same brains as before. What changed was their internal ecosystem. In some cases, severing the vagus nerve eliminated these effects entirely. The microbes could still live in the gut, but their influence on behavior vanished. This confirmed that the gut-brain connection was not symbolic, it was physical, it was causal. Human studies followed. People with certain gut microbiome patterns were more likely to experience anxiety, depression, or stress sensitivity. Others showed links between microbiome diversity and emotional resilience. These were correlations at first, and correlation is not causation. But as intervention studies grew more refined, causation became harder to dismiss. Altering the microbiome through diet, probiotics, or antibiotics could change mood and cognitive function in measurable ways. The brain was responding to the gut. This does not mean microbes control you in a simple sense. There is no single bacterium making decisions on your behalf. But it does mean that your mental state emerges from a conversation, one in which you are not the only participant. This realization has profound implications. If mood, stress, and even aspects of behavior are influenced by microbial activity, then mental health is not confined to the brain alone. It is distributed across systems. The boundary between mind and body becomes blurred. The boundary between self and environment becomes thinner. What you eat changes which microbes thrive. Which microbes thrive changes what chemicals are produced. Those chemicals change how your nervous system behaves, your internal ecosystem responds to your environment, and then reshapes how you experience that environment in return. This is a feedback loop, and you are inside it. The microbiome is not static, it changes throughout life. It is shaped by birth method, childhood environment, diet, stress, illness, and medication. Two people may share nearly identical human DNA and yet host radically different microbial worlds. These differences may help explain why people respond so differently to the same foods, the same stressors, the same medications. One person thrives, another struggles. The difference may not be willpower, it may be biology, distributed biology. This perspective does not diminish human agency, but it does complicate it. You are still you, but you is not singular. You are an emergent system, a collaboration between human cells, neural networks, immune signaling, hormones, and microbial communities. The brain remains central, but it is no longer alone. The idea of a second brain is not meant to replace the first. It is meant to reveal that cognition, emotion, and behavior are shaped by systems far older than conscious thought. Microbes evolved billions of years before humans existed. They developed chemical communication long before neurons appeared. When nervous systems evolved, they did not replace microbial signaling. They integrated with it. The microbiome did not adapt to the brain. The brain adapted into a world that already existed. This is the foundation of the gut-brain connection. In the next part, we will explore how this hidden system develops from birth, how modern life disrupts it, and why many chronic conditions may be less about defects in the brain and more about imbalances in an ecosystem we are only beginning to understand. The influence of the microbiome does not begin in adulthood. It begins before memory, before language, before conscious thought. Long before you form a sense of self, your internal ecosystem is already taking shape, and it shapes you in return. At birth, the human body is relatively sterile. Within hours, it is not. The process by which microbes first colonize the body is one of the most consequential biological events of a human life. Yet for most of history, it went unnoticed. As an infant enters the world, microbes flood in from the environment. Skin contact, breathing, feeding. Every interaction seeds the body with microscopic life. But the way this happens matters. One of the strongest influences is the mode of birth. During vaginal birth, an infant is exposed to the mother's vaginal and gut microbes. These organisms are adapted to coexist with the human body. They form the foundation of a balanced microbiome. During cesarean delivery, this exposure is bypassed. Instead, initial colonization often comes from skin-associated and environmental microbes. This leads to a different microbial starting point, one that can persist for years. This does not mean caesarean birth is harmful, it means it is biologically different. Studies have linked early microbiome differences to variations in immune development, allergy risk, and metabolic regulation. The infant immune system learns what is self and what is threat by interacting with microbes during this critical window. Without these interactions, the immune system remains undertrained. This early period is a dialogue. The body does not simply tolerate microbes, it negotiates with them. Immune cells learn restraint as much as defense. In return, microbes learn which signals allow them to coexist peacefully. This negotiation shapes not only immunity, but neural development. In early life, the brain undergoes explosive growth. Neural circuits are formed, pruned, and stabilized. During this same period, microbial metabolites influence neurotransmitter availability, stress hormone regulation, and inflammation levels, all factors known to affect brain development. The gut-brain connection is active from the beginning. Animal studies have shown that germ-free animals, raised without any microbes, develop abnormal stress responses. Their brains show altered patterns of neural connectivity. Their behavior differs in measurable ways. When microbes are introduced later, some changes reverse, others do not. This suggests there are critical windows, periods during which microbial signals are required for normal development. Modern life has altered these signals dramatically. Antibiotics save lives, but they do not discriminate. They eliminate harmful bacteria and beneficial ones alike. In early childhood, repeated antibiotic exposure can reshape the microbiome in lasting ways. So can diet. Traditional diets were rich in fiber, complex carbohydrates that human enzymes cannot digest, but microbes can. These fibers feed beneficial bacteria, which in turn produce compounds that support gut lining integrity and regulate inflammation. Modern diets are often low in fiber and high in refined sugars and fats. This starves beneficial microbes and favors others that thrive in inflammatory conditions. Stress adds another layer. Psychological stress alters gut motility, immune signaling, and hormone levels. These changes reshape the microbial environment. Certain microbes flourish under stress, others decline. The microbiome responds to your mental state and then feeds back into it. This creates a loop. A stressful environment alters microbial composition. Altered microbes produce different chemical signals. Those signals affect brain function and stress sensitivity. The loop reinforces itself. This may help explain why early life stress can have long-lasting effects on mental health. It is not only shaping neural circuits, it may also be shaping the ecosystem that supports or undermines those circuits. The microbiome does not act alone, it works through interaction with the immune system. Immune cells are not just defenders, they are communicators. They relay information between gut and brain. They respond to microbial signals and adjust inflammation levels accordingly. Low-grade chronic inflammation has been linked to depression, anxiety, and cognitive decline. Certain microbial profiles promote inflammatory signaling, others suppress it. This means that mental health cannot be fully understood without considering immune status, and immune status cannot be understood without considering microbes. The boundaries blur further. As children grow, their microbiome becomes more stable, but it never becomes fixed. Diet, environment, illness, medication and stress continue to shape it throughout life. By adolescence, the microbiome has developed enough complexity to resist short-term disturbances, but long-term patterns remain influential. This challenges another assumption, that development is driven primarily by genes. Genes matter, but genes do not act in isolation. They are expressed in response to signals, many of which come from microbes. Two individuals with similar genetic predispositions can diverge dramatically based on microbial exposure. One may develop inflammatory conditions, another may not. One may be resilient to stress, another may struggle. The difference may lie not in DNA, but in the ecosystem that interacts with it. This does not mean that microbes determine destiny. It means that biology is collaborative. The brain does not sit at the top of a hierarchy, issuing commands downward. It participates in a network. Signals flow up and down, across systems, across species. The second brain is not a rival to the first. It is part of the same conversation. This perspective reframes responsibility in subtle ways. Mental health struggles are often framed as failures of thought, will, or coping. But if gut microbes influence mood and stress, then suffering is not simply a cognitive problem. It is a systemic one. This does not remove agency. It contextualizes it. You cannot think your way out of every imbalance. Sometimes the imbalance is chemical. Sometimes it is microbial. Sometimes it is both. Understanding this opens new possibilities for treatment, but also new cautions. The microbiome is complex. It cannot be reduced to good and bad bacteria. Interventions that help one person may harm another. Probiotics are not universally beneficial. Antibiotics are not universally harmful. The ecosystem responds as a whole. This is why early attempts to manipulate the microbiome often produced mixed results. Science was looking for single causes in a system defined by interactions. As research matured, the focus shifted from individual species to patterns, diversity, balance, resilience. A healthy microbiome is not uniform, it is diverse. It contains many species performing overlapping roles. This redundancy provides stability. When diversity collapses, the system becomes fragile. Fragile systems are more likely to produce extreme responses, inflammation, stress sensitivity, dysregulation. This fragility may be one of the hidden costs of modern life. Urban environments, processed foods, reduced microbial exposure, and chronic stress all narrow microbial diversity. We live cleaner lives than any generation before us. Biologically, this may come at a cost. The hygiene hypothesis suggests that reduced exposure to microbes in early life contributes to immune dysregulation and allergies. The microbiome expands this idea further, linking reduced exposure to mental and metabolic outcomes as well. We are only beginning to map these connections, but the direction is clear. The brain does not develop in isolation. It develops in dialogue with an ecosystem that begins forming at birth and continues evolving throughout life. To understand the mind, we must understand that ecosystem. The idea of a second brain is not mystical. It is anatomical, chemical, and evolutionary. It reflects the fact that neural control is distributed, not centralized. Your thoughts emerge from networks. Some of those networks are human, some are microbial. They do not compete, they cooperate. Sometimes smoothly, sometimes not. In the next part, we will explore how this cooperation can break down, how imbalances in the microbiome are linked to specific mental and neurological conditions, and why restoring balance is far more complex than simply adding a few beneficial bacteria. Because once the body is understood as an ecosystem, health becomes less about control and more about balance. As the idea of the microbiome as a second brain gained traction, it forced scientists to confront an even deeper question. If microbes influence mood, stress, and behavior, where does personal identity actually reside? This question marked a turning point in microbiome research. The focus shifted from health outcomes alone to something more subtle, the relationship between biology and the self. For centuries, identity was assumed to emerge from the brain alone. Personality, temperament, emotional tendencies, and even habits were thought to be products of neural wiring shaped by genes and experience. The body was a support system, the mind was the center. The microbiome complicates this picture. It introduces a biological influence that is neither genetic nor purely experiential. It is inherited, shaped, and modified, but never fully controlled. It exists in constant dialogue with the nervous system, quietly influencing how signals are processed long before they reach conscious awareness. This influence is not dramatic. It does not override thought. It biases it. Bias in biological terms means shifting probabilities, making certain responses more likely than others, increasing sensitivity here, dampening reactivity there. Over time, these small shifts accumulate into recognizable patterns that feel like personality. One person may be naturally resilient to stress, another may be more reactive. One may recover quickly from emotional setbacks, another may linger in negative states. Genetics plays a role. Experience plays a role. But microbial signaling may quietly tilt the balance. This idea is unsettling because it undermines the assumption that identity is fully internal. If microbial communities influence emotional tone, motivation, and stress thresholds, then the self becomes partially ecological. You are not only shaped by your past and your genes, you are shaped by the living system inside you. This does not mean identity is fragile or artificial. It means it is emergent, arising from interactions rather than from a single source. The brain integrates signals from everywhere. Hormones, immune molecules, nutrients, and microbial metabolites all converge on neural circuits. Conscious thought emerges at the end of this chain, not the beginning. By the time you feel a mood or make a decision, the system has already been influenced. This realization challenges cultural narratives around control and responsibility. We are accustomed to thinking of emotional regulation as a mental skill, something learned, practiced, and refined through awareness. And it is. But awareness operates within biological constraints. If baseline stress chemistry is elevated by microbial imbalance, emotional regulation requires more effort. If calming neurotransmitter pathways are supported by microbial metabolites, regulation feels easier. The effort is real in both cases. The terrain is different. This reframing does not absolve responsibility. It contextualizes it. It suggests that struggling is not necessarily failing. It may be compensating. The microbiome also introduces variability that cannot be explained by genetics alone. Identical twins who share the same DNA often differ significantly in mood, behavior, and mental health outcomes. These differences increase with age. Environmental exposure and life experience contribute, but so does divergence in microbial ecosystems. Even when twins grow up together, Their microbiomes diverge over time due to subtle differences in diet, stress, illness, and medication. The body remembers these differences biologically. This helps explain why one twin may develop anxiety or depression while the other does not, even under similar conditions. The difference may not be in the brain, it may be in the ecosystem supporting it. This perspective also reshapes how we understand habits and cravings. Cravings are often framed as psychological weaknesses, but microbes play a role in shaping appetite signals. Certain microbial populations flourish on specific nutrients. When they dominate, they can influence signaling pathways that increase desire for those foods. This does not mean microbes want anything in a conscious sense. It means evolution favors microbes that can influence host behavior in ways that support their survival. Over time, this creates feedback loops. Microbes shape cravings. Cravings shape diet. The loop stabilizes around certain patterns, healthy or unhealthy. Breaking these loops is difficult not because of lack of willpower, but because the system resists change. This resistance is biological. The same applies to stress behaviors. Chronic stress alters the microbiome. Certain microbes thrive in stress-associated environments. These microbes can amplify inflammatory signaling, which increases stress sensitivity. Stress feeds the ecosystem that makes stress more likely. It is emergent. Understanding this shifts how change is approached. Instead of relying solely on cognitive strategies, interventions can target the system as a whole. Diet, sleep, stress management, social connection, and microbial diversity. None of these act alone. Together they reshape the environment in which the second brain operates. The microbiome also raises ethical questions. If altering microbial communities can influence mood and behavior, where is the line between treatment and enhancement? Between healing and modification? These questions are no longer hypothetical. Microbiome-based therapies are already being explored for depression, anxiety, autism spectrum conditions, and neurodegenerative diseases. While results are preliminary, they point toward real effects. This introduces a new form of intervention, one that does not target the brain directly but alters the conditions under which the brain functions. Unlike drugs that act on specific receptors, microbiome interventions act indirectly through ecosystem shifts. Their effects may be broader, slower, and harder to predict. This unpredictability demands caution. Changing an ecosystem can have unintended consequences. Removing one influence may expose another. Enhancing one pathway may suppress others. The microbiome does not respond to force. It responds to patterns. This is why extreme interventions often fail while gradual, sustained changes succeed. The second brain is not engineered. It is cultivated. This has implications for how society thinks about health. Modern medicine excels at acute intervention, fixing broken parts, eliminating threats, correcting deficiencies. Ecosystem health requires a different mindset. It requires maintenance rather than repair. This shift is uncomfortable because it offers fewer quick fixes, but it aligns with how the body actually works. The microbiome evolved in a world of slow change. Rapid extreme interventions are novel stressors. The system adapts, but not always in predictable ways. This may explain why many people experience temporary improvement followed by relapse when attempting rapid lifestyle changes. The ecosystem needs time, it needs consistency, it needs stability. Understanding this fosters patience with the body and with the self. Identity in this view is not a static possession, it is a dynamic pattern sustained by ongoing biological cooperation. You are not a fixed essence, you are a process. The microbiome is part of that process. It does not replace the mind, it shapes the conditions under which the mind operates. This perspective does not diminish individuality, it deepens it. It acknowledges that individuality arises not from isolation but from interaction between genes, experiences, environments, and microbial communities. The second brain is not an intruder. It is a partner, sometimes supportive, sometimes disruptive, always present. Recognizing this partnership changes how we think about change. Change is not about overriding biology, it is about working with it. In the next part, we will explore how this understanding is influencing real-world medicine and public health, how doctors are beginning to integrate microbiome science into treatment plans, why progress is slow, and what must change before this hidden system can be responsibly included in mainstream care. Because once the self is understood as ecological, healing becomes less about fixing what is broken and more about restoring balance to a system that was never meant to stand alone. As microbiome research moves from the laboratory into clinics, it collides with a reality far messier than early discoveries suggested. The science is compelling, but translation into medicine is slow, cautious, and often frustrating. But this is not because the microbiome is unimportant, it is because it is too important, too complex, and too interconnected to treat casually. Modern medicine was built around targeting single causes: identify the pathogen, eliminate it, block the receptor, replace the missing chemical. This approach works remarkably well for many conditions, but the microbiome does not fit this model. There is no single microbiome disorder. There is no universal healthy microbiome. There is no standard intervention that works for everyone. Instead, there are patterns, tendencies, and probabilities. This creates tension between scientific discovery and clinical practice. Doctors need clear guidelines. Patients want clear answers. The microbiome offers neither, at least not yet. One of the first medical applications of microbiome science was fecal microbiota transplantation, or FMT. Originally developed to treat severe recurrent gut infections that failed all other treatments, it proved astonishingly effective in that narrow context. By transferring a complete microbial ecosystem from a healthy donor into a patient, doctors could restore balance almost instantly. The infection disappeared. The gut stabilized. This success electrified the field. If entire ecosystems could be transferred, could other conditions be treated the same way? Depression, anxiety, autism, Parkinson's disease. Even neurodegenerative disorders became targets of investigation. But outside of severe infections, results became inconsistent. Some patients improved dramatically. Others saw no change. A few experienced unexpected side effects. The same intervention produced different outcomes in different bodies. This variability revealed an uncomfortable truth. Microbiome-based treatments are not plug and play. Every individual hosts a unique ecosystem shaped by genetics, diet, environment, stress history, and medication use. Introducing new microbes into that system does not guarantee integration. Sometimes the newcomers fail to survive, sometimes they disrupt existing balances. The ecosystem responds. This is not how traditional drugs behave. A pill delivers a defined dose of a known compound. Its effects can be measured, predicted, and standardized. Microbial interventions are living systems. They adapt, compete, cooperate, and evolve. This makes regulation difficult. How do you approve a treatment whose active ingredient is a community rather than a molecule? How do you control dosage, predict interactions, or define side effects when the system itself is dynamic? These questions have slowed widespread adoption. In response, researchers shifted toward more controlled strategies. Instead of transferring entire ecosystems, they began identifying functional pathways, specific microbial metabolites, or signaling mechanisms associated with beneficial outcomes. The idea was to support these functions without altering the entire ecosystem. For example, rather than adding bacteria directly, clinicians might encourage the growth of beneficial microbes by altering diet. Increasing dietary fiber can selectively nourish microbes that produce anti-inflammatory compounds. Reducing certain processed foods can starve microbes associated with inflammation. This approach is slower but safer. It respects the ecosystem rather than attempting to overwrite it. Dietary interventions have shown promise in mood regulation, stress resilience, and cognitive function, especially when changes are sustained over time. But again, results vary. What works for one person may not work for another. This variability frustrates patients and practitioners alike. It also exposes a deeper challenge. Personalized biology requires personalized medicine. The microbiome resists standardization. Two people with the same diagnosis may require entirely different interventions to restore balance. This pushes medicine toward a model that is more nuanced but also more resource-intensive. It requires detailed assessment, long-term monitoring, and adaptive strategies. Health becomes a process, not a prescription. This is a radical shift. It also raises ethical concerns. If microbiome profiling becomes common, who owns that data? Microbial DNA can reveal intimate details about diet, lifestyle, environment, and disease risk. It is biological information that extends beyond the human genome. How should it be protected? There is also the question of access. Ecosystem-based care favours those with time, resources, and stable environments. Healthy diets, reduced stress, and long-term consistency are easier to achieve for some than others. If microbiome health becomes a cornerstone of mental and physical well-being, inequalities could widen unless public health systems adapt accordingly. This is not a scientific problem alone, it is a societal one. Another challenge lies in expectations. The microbiome has been sensationalized in popular media. Headlines promise cures, hacks, and instant transformation. This creates unrealistic hopes and undermines trust when results fail to materialize. The reality is slower and less dramatic. The microbiome does not offer quick fixes, it offers gradual shift. Changes unfold over weeks or months, not days. They depend on consistency, not intensity, and they interact with other systems in unpredictable ways. This makes progress difficult to market, but biologically honest. Clinicians working at the frontier of microbiome medicine emphasize patience. They frame improvement not as elimination of symptoms, but as increased resilience. Resilience is harder to measure, but it may be more meaningful. A resilient system does not eliminate stress. It recovers from it. It does not prevent negative emotions, it regulates them. It does not guarantee happiness, it reduces vulnerability. This aligns closely with what the microbiome appears to support. By dampening inflammation, stabilizing neurotransmitter production, and reinforcing gut-brain communication, a balanced microbiome reduces the likelihood of extreme dysregulation. It does not eliminate adversity, it softens its impact. This reframing also shifts responsibility away from blame. If mental health is influenced by ecosystem balance, then suffering is not simply a failure of mindset, it is a signal that the system is under strain. Addressing that strain requires addressing multiple factors: biological, psychological, and environmental. No single intervention is sufficient. This system's perspective is uncomfortable for medicine, which prefers clarity and control. But it reflects reality more accurately. The brain evolved within a body. The body evolved within an ecosystem. Health emerges from alignment between them. The microbiome sits at the center of this alignment. Understanding this does not diminish the brain's importance. It contextualizes it. The brain remains the organ of consciousness, memory, and reasoning, but it does not operate in isolation. It responds to signals from systems that predate it evolutionarily. Microbes were shaping environments long before nervous systems existed. When brains evolved, they inherited this context. The second brain is not a competitor, it is an ancestral influence that never left. Medicine is only beginning to account for this. Future treatments may involve microbial diagnostics alongside genetic testing. Mental health care may include dietary and microbial interventions alongside therapy and medication. Public health may prioritize microbial diversity as a protective factor. These shifts will take time. They require new training, new frameworks, and new patience. But they also promise a more integrated understanding of health, one that respects the body as a living system rather than a machine. In the next part, we will look ahead. We will explore what this emerging understanding means for the future of medicine, identity, and human self-understanding, and why recognizing the microbiome as a partner rather than an enemy may fundamentally change how we care for ourselves and each other. Because once the body is understood as an ecosystem, health becomes not a battle to be won, but a balance to be maintained. As the science of the microbiome matures, it begins to reshape not only medicine, but the way humans understand themselves. What started as a biological discovery becomes something broader, a challenge to the idea of individuality as something sealed, self-contained, and internally governed. The realization is simple, but its implications are profound. You are not a singular biological entity. You are a living system composed of many interacting systems. The microbiome makes this impossible to ignore. For centuries, identity was framed as something that emerged from within, from the brain, from consciousness, from internal thought. The body was a vessel. The environment was external. Microbes were intruders. That framing no longer holds. The microbiome is not external. It is not temporary. It is not accidental. It is a permanent participant in your physiology, influencing digestion, immunity, metabolism, and neural signaling simultaneously. This means the boundary between self and environment is porous. What you eat becomes chemistry. Chemistry becomes signaling. Signaling becomes mood, motivation, and perception. The world does not stop at your skin. This does not diminish individuality. It redefines it. Individuality becomes a pattern of relationships rather than a fixed core. Your uniqueness arises not only from your genes and experiences, but from the specific ecosystem you host and the way it interacts with your nervous system. This perspective helps explain why attempts to reduce mental health to either biology or psychology have always failed. Mental states are not purely chemical. They are not purely cognitive. They are emergent properties of a system that spans brain, body, microbes, and environment. The microbiome occupies a critical position in this system because it mediates between what is outside you and what happens inside you. It translates diet, stress, and exposure into biochemical signals the brain responds to. In this sense, the microbiome is not a second brain in competition with the first. It is a translator. It translates the external world into internal states. This reframing alters how agency is understood. Agency does not disappear, but it becomes distributed. You still make decisions, but the conditions under which those decisions arise are shaped by systems beyond conscious control. Hunger, fatigue, irritability, calm. These states influence choice before thought begins. The microbiome helps shape those states. This does not make free will an illusion, it makes it conditional. Free will operates within biological constraints. Those constraints are not moral failures, they are features of a living system. Recognizing this encourages humility toward oneself and toward others. Struggle is not always a lack of discipline. Stability is not always virtue. Often they reflect underlying system balance. This insight also reshapes how health is pursued. Health is no longer the absence of disease, it is the presence of adaptability. A healthy microbiome does not prevent all problems. It increases the system's ability to recover from them. It provides buffering capacity, the ability to absorb stress without tipping into dysfunction. This buffering capacity depends on diversity. Diversity is resilience. When many microbial species perform overlapping roles, the system can compensate when one pathway is disrupted. When diversity collapses, the system becomes brittle. This principle extends beyond biology. Ecosystems collapse when diversity is lost. Cultures destabilize when variety is eliminated. Bodies suffer when microbial diversity declines. The microbiome becomes a microcosm of a broader rule. Resilience comes from redundancy and balance, not optimization. Modern life often prioritizes efficiency over resilience. Highly processed foods maximize convenience but minimize microbial nourishment. Antibiotics eliminate threats but also remove protective diversity. Chronic stress maximizes productivity but destabilizes internal systems. These pressures are not malicious, they are misaligned. The human body and its microbial partners evolved under conditions of gradual change, varied diets, and intermittent stress. The pace and uniformity of modern environments exceed what these systems are optimized for. The microbiome reveals this mismatch. It responds to modern pressures not with failure but with adaptation, sometimes in ways that produce unintended consequences. Inflammation, metabolic dysregulation, and mood instability may not be signs of broken systems. They may be signs of systems doing their best under unnatural conditions. This reframes pathology as signal, not defect. Symptoms become messages. Fatigue may signal chronic immune activation. Anxiety may signal heightened stress chemistry. Cravings may signal microbial imbalance. These signals are not enemies to be suppressed at all costs. They are information about system state. Listening to them does not mean rejecting medical intervention. It means integrating it into a broader context. Medication can be life-saving. Therapy can be transformative. Lifestyle changes can be powerful. None of these act alone. The microbiome adds another dimension to care, one that emphasizes maintenance over correction, patterns over events, and long-term balance over short-term control. This perspective also changes how prevention is understood. Prevention is no longer just screening and early detection. It is ecosystem support. Supporting microbial diversity early in life may reduce vulnerability later. Supporting diversity through adulthood may buffer against stress-related conditions. Supporting diversity in aging may slow cognitive and metabolic decline. These ideas are still being tested, but they align with what is already known about biological systems. Stability emerges from diversity. Fragility emerges from uniformity. The microbiome embodies this principle inside the body. As research continues, it is likely that microbiome-aware approaches will become more refined. Diagnostics will improve. Interventions will become more personalized. Predictive models will grow more accurate. But the deeper shift has already occurred. The idea of the human as an isolated individual has been replaced by the idea of the human as a living consortium. This does not diminish human value, it enriches it. It acknowledges that life is cooperative at every scale, from cells to organs to organisms to ecosystems. The second brain is not an invader, it is a reminder that cognition emerges from chemistry, chemistry from metabolism, metabolism from collaboration. You are not alone inside yourself, and you never were. Understanding this does not mean surrendering control, it means exercising it more wisely, by working with the systems that shape you rather than fighting them blindly. The future of health will not belong to a single discipline, it will belong to integration. Integration of brain and body, integration of human and microbial, integration of biology, environment, and experience. The microbiome stands at the center of this integration, invisible, ancient, and essential. It does not think, but it helps shape how you do. And once that is understood, the idea of a second brain stops sounding metaphorical. It becomes an accurate description of a truth that was always there, quietly influencing every thought, every feeling, and every decision, long before we had the tools to notice it. As the implications of the microbiome continue to unfold, a deeper realization emerges, one that extends beyond health, beyond medicine, and into the foundations of how humans understand consciousness, behavior, and responsibility. The microbiome forces us to confront a difficult truth. The mind is not sovereign. This does not mean the mind is powerless. It means it is embedded. For centuries, Western thought treated the mind as a command center, a place where decisions are made and actions are initiated. The body followed orders. Biology was background. The microbiome dismantles this hierarchy. It reveals that cognition does not sit at the top of a pyramid. It emerges from a network. Signals rise from the gut, the immune system, hormones, and microbial metabolites long before conscious awareness is engaged. By the time a thought feels like yours, the system has already been influenced. This is not speculation. It is measurable biology. Stress hormones released in response to microbial signals can alter attention and memory. Inflammatory molecules can bias perception toward threat. Neurotransmitter availability can shift emotional tone. Appetite hormones can influence motivation and reward sensitivity. None of this requires conscious participation. The mind interprets the outcome, not the origin. This challenges one of the most deeply ingrained assumptions of modern culture, that rational thought is the primary driver of behavior. In reality, rational thought often operates as a post hoc narrator, explaining choices that were already biased by biology. The microbiome is not the only influence in this process, but it is one of the most persistent and least acknowledged. This realization has ethical implications. If behavior is influenced by internal ecosystems, how should responsibility be understood? Where does accountability begin and end? These questions are uncomfortable but unavoidable. The answer is not to eliminate responsibility, it is to contextualize it. Responsibility exists within constraints. Those constraints are biological, psychological, and environmental. Ignoring them does not make them disappear, it only makes judgment harsher and solutions less effective. Understanding the microbiome adds nuance. It suggests that helping someone change behavior may require changing conditions, not just expectations. This is already evident in addiction research. Substance use disorders are not merely failures of will, they are associated with profound changes in stress regulation, reward circuitry, and, increasingly recognized, gut microbiome composition. Alcohol, opioids, and other substances alter microbial balance. This imbalance feeds back into cravings, anxiety, and emotional dysregulation, reinforcing dependence. Breaking this cycle requires more than abstinence. It requires restoring balance to systems that have adapted to chronic disruption. The microbiome does not excuse harmful behavior, but it explains why behavior can be so resistant to change. This explanation does not weaken moral frameworks, it strengthens interventions. When biology is acknowledged, support becomes more effective. The same applies to mood disorders. Depression and anxiety are often framed as disorders of thought, but microbiome research shows they are also disorders of signaling, involving immune activation, metabolic disruption, and altered gut-brain communication. This reframing reduces stigma. If mood is influenced by systemic imbalance, then suffering is not a personal failure. It is a physiological state that deserves care. Care in this context is not limited to medication or therapy. It includes sleep, nutrition, stress reduction, social connection, and environmental stability, all factors that shape the microbiome. This holistic approach does not replace traditional treatments, it complements them. The future of mental health will likely be integrative, combining neuroscience, immunology, microbiology, psychology, and social science. The microbiome sits at the crossroads of these disciplines. It connects what we eat to how we feel. It connects stress to inflammation. It connects environment to identity. This interconnectedness also raises questions about autonomy. If your internal ecosystem influences your mental state, how much control do you really have? The answer is complex. You do not control individual microbes. You do influence the conditions they live in. This distinction matters. Autonomy does not require direct control over every variable. It requires the ability to shape environments over time. Diet, routines, relationships, and stress management are indirect forms of influence. Slow, cumulative, and powerful. The microbiome responds to patterns, not commands. This aligns with a broader truth about human change. Lasting change rarely comes from force, it comes from consistency. The body is not persuaded by intention alone. It is persuaded by repetition. This realization invites patience. Quick fixes are seductive because they promise control. Ecosystems do not respond to them, they respond to sustained signals. The microbiome teaches this lesson relentlessly. It also reshapes how aging is understood. As people age, microbial diversity often declines. This decline is associated with increased inflammation, reduced metabolic flexibility, and cognitive vulnerability. Some of the changes traditionally attributed to aging may be partly ecological, reflecting the gradual simplification of internal ecosystems. Supporting microbial diversity in later life may help preserve resilience. Not immortality, not youth, but adaptability. Again, this is not a promise, it is a direction of inquiry. The microbiome does not offer miracles, it offers context. It explains why bodies behave the way they do under certain conditions. It reveals hidden variables that were previously invisible. This visibility does not eliminate complexity, it exposes it. As this understanding spreads, cultural narratives may shift. Health may be seen less as a personal achievement and more as a shared responsibility between individuals, communities, and environments. Urban design, food systems, work culture, and healthcare policy all influence microbial exposure and stress levels. These influences cascade into mental and physical health outcomes. The microbiome makes it impossible to pretend that health is purely individual, it is collective. You inherit microbial patterns from caregivers. You share microbes with people you live with. You are influenced by the environments you move through. Isolation is a myth. This does not diminish individuality, it situates it. Identity emerges within networks, biological and social. The microbiome is one of the oldest networks humans participate in. It predates culture, language, and even complex nervous systems. It is ancient. Recognizing its role does not reduce humans to bacteria. It acknowledges the layers of evolution that made human cognition possible. The brain did not evolve in a vacuum. It evolved in partnership. This partnership is not always harmonious. Imbalances occur, conflicts arise, but the relationship is foundational. Ignoring it does not restore autonomy. It creates blind spots. The second brain is not a rival intelligence. It is a regulatory system, shaping thresholds, modulating signals, influencing tone. You still think, you still choose, but you do so within a body that is listening to many voices. Some of those voices are microbial. This does not make thought meaningless, it makes it embodied. And embodiment, once acknowledged, changes how care is delivered, how responsibility is framed, and how compassion is practiced. The microbiome does not ask to be in control, it asks to be understood. In the next part, we will turn to the future, not in terms of speculation, but in terms of direction. We will explore how microbiome science may reshape prevention, education, and public health, and why the most important changes may occur not in hospitals, but in how societies design environments that support both human and microbial well-being. Because once the second brain is recognized, the question is no longer whether it matters, the question is how wisely we choose to live with it. As the understanding of the microbiome deepens, it begins to influence not only how individuals think about health, but how societies think about prevention, education, and the environments people inhabit. The second brain does not exist in isolation inside individual bodies. It is shaped continuously by collective choices: how food is produced, how cities are designed, how stress is normalized, and how early life is supported. This is where microbiome science quietly becomes political, cultural, and structural. Public health has traditionally focused on controlling threats, pathogens, toxins, deficiencies. Clean water, sanitation, vaccines, and antibiotics transformed human survival. These interventions remain essential, but they were designed for a world where the primary biological danger was infection. Today, the dominant health challenges are different. Chronic inflammation, metabolic disorders, stress-related conditions, mood disorders, and neurodegenerative diseases now shape the global burden of illness. These conditions are not caused by single pathogens. They emerge slowly from patterns of living. The microbiome sits at the center of this shift. It translates long-term environmental patterns into biological consequences. Diet, stress, sleep, pollution, social isolation, and early childhood conditions all leave microbial signatures that persist over time. This means prevention cannot rely solely on eliminating threats. It must also focus on supporting resilience. Resilience is not a trait. It is a system property. A resilient microbiome can absorb disruptions without collapsing. It can recover from antibiotics, stress, or illness. It can buffer inflammatory responses and stabilize metabolic and neural signaling. A fragile microbiome cannot. Public health, from this perspective, becomes less about emergency response and more about ecosystem stewardship. This begins early. Early childhood is a critical window not just for brain development but for microbial ecosystem formation. Birth conditions, breastfeeding, early diet, antibiotic exposure and stress all shape the microbiome in ways that can persist for years. Supporting caregivers during this period is not only a social good, it is a biological investment. Parental stress affects infant stress regulation. Stress regulation affects microbial composition. Microbial composition affects immune and neural development. These are not abstract connections. They are measurable pathways. This reframes policies around parental leave, childcare support, and early nutrition. These are no longer merely economic or social issues. They are interventions in long-term population health. Education also enters the picture. Food education is often framed in terms of calories, nutrients, and weight. Microbiome science adds another dimension: food as ecological input. Fiber is not just digestion aid. It is microbial fuel. Diversity of plant foods promotes microbial diversity. Ultra-processed foods simplify microbial ecosystems. Teaching this does not require fear, it requires literacy. Understanding that diet shapes internal ecosystems empowers people to make choices based on long-term system health rather than short-term restriction or optimization. The same applies to stress education. Stress is often normalized as a personal challenge to be managed individually, but chronic stress is a biological force that reshapes immune signaling, hormonal balance, and microbial composition. Work environments, urban design, noise exposure, and social instability all contribute to baseline stress levels. These factors do not affect everyone equally. When stress becomes structural, its biological consequences become structural as well. The microbiome exposes this clearly. It does not respond to motivation alone, it responds to conditions. This has implications for how responsibility is distributed. If environments produce dysregulation, blaming individuals for their symptoms is ineffective. Supporting healthier environments becomes a form of prevention. This does not eliminate personal agency. It recognizes that agency operates within contexts that can either support or undermine it. The microbiome also highlights the importance of exposure. Humans evolved in contact with diverse microbial environments: soil, plants, animals, and other humans. Modern environments reduce this exposure dramatically. Urban living, sterilized surfaces, indoor lifestyles, and reduced contact with natural environments narrow microbial diversity. This narrowing may contribute to immune dysregulation and inflammatory conditions. Reintroducing diversity does not mean abandoning hygiene or medicine. It means recognizing that sterility is not the same as health. Green spaces, outdoor activity, and contact with natural environments are not luxuries. They are sources of microbial input that support ecosystem diversity. This perspective reframes urban planning. Cities designed around cars, noise, and constant stimulation increase stress and reduce microbial exposure. Cities designed around walkability, green space, and social interaction support both mental health and microbial diversity. Again, these are not aesthetic choices, they are biological ones. The microbiome also influences how societies think about aging. Aging populations face increased rates of cognitive decline, inflammation, and metabolic disease. Microbial diversity often declines with age, especially in institutionalized environments with limited dietary variety and reduced exposure. Supporting microbial diversity in aging populations may help preserve resilience and quality of life. This includes dietary diversity, social engagement, mobility, and reduced unnecessary antibiotic use. Care environments become ecosystems. Neglecting this has consequences. The microbiome does not stop influencing health at any age. It adapts, but it never disengages. This challenges the idea that decline is inevitable. Some decline is, but some vulnerability may be ecological rather than chronological. These insights also affect how medical research is conducted. Clinical trials often control variables tightly to isolate effects. This can obscure ecosystem-level interactions. Microbiome-aware research must embrace complexity rather than eliminate it. This requires larger datasets, longer timelines, and interdisciplinary collaboration. It also requires humility. The microbiome teaches that living systems cannot be fully predicted or controlled. They must be observed, supported, and guided gently. This lesson extends beyond biology. Modern societies often attempt to optimize systems for efficiency, but ecosystems favor resilience. These goals are not always aligned. The microbiome is resilient when diverse, redundant, and flexible. Efficiency reduces diversity. Over-optimization increases fragility. This tension appears in food systems, work culture, healthcare delivery, and urban design. Microbiome science does not resolve this tension, it reveals it. Recognizing this may help societies make different choices, valuing sustainability over short-term optimization. The second brain thus becomes a metaphor not just for gut-brain communication, but for a broader truth. Intelligence is distributed. Stability emerges from networks. Health depends on relationships. This challenges individualistic narratives that dominate modern culture. You are not an isolated unit optimizing your own outcomes. You are part of multiple systems, biological, social, environmental, that shape you continuously. The microbiome makes this visible inside the body. Once seen, it is difficult to unsee. This does not mean that individuals lose meaning. It means meaning is relational. Care for the self becomes care for systems. Eat in ways that support diversity. Live in ways that reduce chronic stress. Design environments that allow recovery. These are not moral imperatives. They are biological alignments. The microbiome does not judge. It responds. If environments support balance, systems stabilize. If environments impose strain, systems adapt, sometimes in costly ways. Understanding this reframes failure. When bodies struggle, it is often because systems are strained, not because individuals are deficient. This perspective fosters compassion, not only for others but for oneself. The second brain is not an excuse. It is an explanation that expands the scope of responsibility from isolated individuals to shared systems. As microbiome science continues to evolve, its most important contributions may not come from new treatments alone, but from new ways of thinking about health, responsibility, and design. The future of well-being may depend less on fixing broken parts and more on creating conditions in which systems, human and microbial, can maintain balance over time. In the final stages of this exploration, we will return to the individual, not to isolate them again, but to understand how awareness of the second brain can change daily choices, self-perception, and the experience of living in a body that is always quietly in conversation with life itself. Because understanding the microbiome is not just about knowing what lives inside you, it is about recognizing that you live inside systems too, and that health emerges when those systems are allowed to work together rather than against one another. As the exploration of the microbiome reaches its final layers, the focus shifts away from experience and interpretation and towards synthesis. What does all of this mean when the pieces are placed together? Biology, behavior, identity, and environment, without exaggeration and without mysticism? The answer is quieter than many expect. The microbiome does not redefine what it means to be human. It clarifies it. For a long time, human biology was described using mechanical metaphors. The body was a machine. Organs were components. The brain was a central processor. When something went wrong, the solution was to repair or replace a part. This framework worked well for acute problems. It struggles with chronic ones. The microbiome exposes why. Living systems are not machines. They are adaptive networks. Their behavior emerges from interactions, feedback loops, and context. No single component is fully in control. Stability arises not from dominance but from coordination. The brain itself follows this rule. Neural activity is not governed by a single center. It emerges from networks of neurons responding to internal and external signals. The microbiome adds another layer to this network, one that operates chemically rather than electrically, but with equal influence over thresholds, tone, and resilience. This does not diminish the brain's role, it completes it. The brain evolved inside a body already governed by microbial signaling. Immune systems learn to negotiate with microbes before nervous systems learn to think. When cognition emerged, it did so within an environment shaped by microbial chemistry. In this sense, the microbiome is not an addition to human biology. It is part of its foundation. Understanding this dissolves false oppositions that have shaped science and culture for centuries. Mind versus body, biology versus experience, nature versus choice. These divisions were never fully accurate. They were convenient. The microbiome makes convenience impossible. Mental states cannot be fully separated from immune activity. Immune activity cannot be separated from microbial balance. Microbial balance cannot be separated from diet, stress, and environment. Everything connects. This does not mean everything is equal. Some influences matter more than others. Some systems are more sensitive, but none operate in isolation. This realization brings both humility and clarity. Humility because control is more limited than once believed. Clarity because confusion was often the result of missing variables. The microbiome was one of those missing variables. It explains why two people with similar lives can respond so differently to the same stressor. It explains why mental health treatments succeed for some and fail for others. It explains why lifestyle changes sometimes work dramatically and sometimes barely at all. The difference is not willpower, it is system state. This perspective changes how success and failure are interpreted. Improvement becomes less about fixing something broken and more about restoring balance to something strained. Decline becomes less about defect and more about depletion. This does not romanticize suffering. It contextualizes it. A system under chronic strain behaves differently than one at equilibrium. It narrows options, amplifies threat, conserves energy. These behaviors make sense biologically, even when they feel disruptive psychologically. Understanding this reduces fear. Fear often comes from misunderstanding. When symptoms appear random or uncontrollable, anxiety increases. When they are understood as signals from an adaptive system, they become interpretable. Interpretation allows response. This is one of the microbiome's most important contributions. It converts mystery into mechanism without stripping experience of meaning. Thoughts still matter. Feelings still matter. Choice still matters, but they matter within a context that must be respected. This respect leads to a different model of care. Care becomes ecological rather than corrective. Instead of asking, How do I eliminate this symptom? The question becomes, what conditions would allow this system to stabilize? Sometimes the answer involves medication, sometimes therapy, sometimes diet, rest, connection, or time. Often, it involves several at once. The microbiome encourages integration rather than hierarchy. No single intervention is supreme. This model is slower, but it is more durable. It also aligns with evolutionary reality. Human biology did not evolve for speed or optimization. It evolved for survival in variable environments. Flexibility mattered more than efficiency. Redundancy mattered more than precision. The microbiome embodies this principle. Its diversity provides buffering, its adaptability provides resilience. Its sensitivity provides early warning. Ignoring it does not simplify the system. It destabilizes it. Recognizing it does not create certainty. It creates alignment. Alignment between expectation and biology. Alignment between effort and capacity. Alignment between environment and adaptation. This alignment has psychological effects. When people stop fighting their biology, mental energy is freed. When expectations become realistic, frustration decreases. When systems are supported rather than punished, regulation improves. This does not eliminate struggle. It makes struggle navigable. The microbiome also challenges the illusion of independence. Modern culture prizes autonomy, the idea that individuals are self-sufficient agents responsible for their own outcomes. Biology tells a different story. Humans are interdependent by design. Microbes are transferred between people. Stress spreads socially. Diet is shaped by culture. Environments regulate behavior. None of these influences stop at the skin. The microbiome makes this visible at a microscopic scale. You are influenced by others not only emotionally but biologically. This does not reduce individuality, it situates it. Individuality arises within networks. Remove the network and the individual collapses. This truth is uncomfortable in cultures built on self-reliance, but it offers relief as well. You are not meant to carry everything alone. Health is not a personal achievement. It is a condition supported or undermined by systems. This perspective encourages compassion for others whose struggles may reflect unseen strain. Compassion for oneself whose limits are not moral failures. Compassion is not indulgence. It is accurate perception. The microbiome demands accuracy. It does not respond to narratives. It responds to conditions. If conditions improve, balance follows. If conditions worsen, dysregulation follows. There is no judgment in this process, only response. This is perhaps the most important lesson the second brain offers. Biology is not punitive, it is responsive. Misalignment produces symptoms. Alignment produces stability. Symptoms are not enemies, they are signals. This does not mean symptoms should be ignored. It means they should be interpreted before being suppressed. Suppressing signals without addressing cause often shifts the problem elsewhere. This is why chronic conditions migrate, from gut to mood, from mood to metabolism, from metabolism to inflammation. The microbiome sits at the crossroads of these migrations. It does not cause all of them, but it participates in all of them. Understanding this encourages caution in how interventions are framed. Quick solutions promise certainty. Living systems resist certainty. The microbiome teaches patience because patience is how ecosystems heal. This patience is not passive, it is active consistency. Small inputs, repeated over time, reshape system state. Large inputs, applied briefly, rarely do. This principle applies to thought as much as biology. Lasting change comes from sustained alignment, not force. As the idea of the second brain settles into scientific understanding, it will likely fade from novelty into background knowledge, another layer of how bodies work, but its philosophical implications will remain. It reminds us that thinking is not abstract, it is embodied. it is relational. Thought emerges from cooperation between systems that evolve together over deep time. This cooperation is imperfect. Conflict arises. Balance is lost and regained. That is not failure. That is life. The microbiome does not promise clarity, happiness, or control. It offers coherence. Coherence between what the body is doing and what the mind is trying to do. Coherence between environment and adaptation. Coherence between expectation and capacity. Within coherence, suffering becomes intelligible. Growth becomes possible. Care becomes effective. This is not a new philosophy. It is an old biological truth, rediscovered with modern tools. The second brain was always there. We simply learned how to listen. And listening, once it begins, changes not only what we know, but how we live inside ourselves, with a little more patience, a little more realism, and a deeper respect for the living systems that make thought itself possible. As the discussion reaches its closing arc, the microbiome no longer appears as a surprising discovery or a disruptive idea. It settles into something quieter and more enduring, a reminder of how living systems actually function when observed honestly, without simplifying metaphors or demands for certainty. The most important lesson of the microbiome is not that bacteria influence the brain. It is that nothing in biology acts alone. For much of scientific history, understanding advanced by isolation. One variable was separated from the rest, examined, and explained. This method produced extraordinary knowledge, but it also created blind spots when applied to systems that cannot be meaningfully separated. The mind is one of those systems. The microbiome shows that mental life emerges from layers of interaction that operate simultaneously. Neural circuits depend on chemical balance. Chemical balance depends on immune signaling. Immune signaling depends on microbial input. Microbial input depends on environment, diet, stress, and time. Remove any layer, and the picture becomes distorted. This explains why many debates about mental health, behavior, and responsibility become unproductive. Arguments about whether something is biological or psychological miss the point. The distinction collapses under scrutiny. Psychology is biology expressed through experience. Biology is experience constrained by chemistry. The microbiome sits at this intersection, translating environment into internal state. Once this translation is acknowledged, a different kind of understanding becomes possible. Instead of asking why someone feels the way they do in abstract terms, one can ask what conditions are shaping their system. Instead of focusing on symptoms in isolation, one can examine patterns. Instead of demanding control, one can aim for regulation. This shift is subtle but powerful. It does not promise certainty. It reduces confusion. Confusion is often the most distressing aspect of suffering. When experiences feel arbitrary or inexplicable, anxiety increases. When experiences are understood as meaningful responses to system state, anxiety decreases. Meaning does not require justification, it requires context. The microbiome provides context. It explains why rest sometimes restores clarity while effort deepens fatigue. Why social connection can calm anxiety when logic fails. Why diet changes can alter mood even when beliefs remain unchanged. These effects are not psychological tricks, they are biological responses. Understanding this reduces self-conflict. Many people experience inner conflict because they expect their minds to function independently of their bodies. When this expectation fails, frustration follows. The microbiome dissolves this expectation. The mind is not separate from the body, it is a function of it. This does not make thought mechanical, it makes it grounded. Grounded systems behave predictably under certain conditions and unpredictably under others. This is not weakness, it is sensitivity. Sensitivity allows adaptation. The microbiome exemplifies this. It adapts continuously to changes in diet, stress, and environment. When changes are gradual, adaptation is smooth. When changes are abrupt, instability emerges. This pattern repeats at every scale. Individuals adapt best to gradual change. Communities adapt best to gradual change. Ecosystems adapt best to gradual change. Sudden disruption overwhelms regulation. Recognizing this helps explain why modern life produces so much dysregulation. The pace of change exceeds the adaptive capacity of many systems. The microbiome reflects this mismatch clearly. Processed foods replace diverse inputs. Chronic stress replaces episodic stress. Artificial environments replace natural rhythms. Microbial diversity narrows. Regulation weakens. Symptoms follow. These symptoms are often treated as failures to cope rather than as indicators of systemic strain. Reframing them as indicators allows for intervention at the right level. Intervention, in this context, does not mean control. It means adjustment. Adjustment requires awareness. Awareness requires listening. The microbiome teaches listening in an unromantic way. It does not communicate through insight or language. It communicates through pattern and response. Ignore hunger signals and energy regulation worsens. Ignore fatigue and recovery slows. Ignore stress and inflammation rises. These are not punishments. They are feedback. Feedback loops maintain stability when they are respected. When they are ignored, they escalate. This escalation often gets labeled as disorder. But many disorders are extreme forms of regulation trying to restore balance under persistent strain. This does not mean all suffering is adaptive or beneficial. It means suffering often has intelligible causes. Understanding causes does not remove pain. It reduces confusion. Reduced confusion creates space for effective care. Care, informed by microbiome science, becomes less about domination and more about cooperation. Cooperation between disciplines, cooperation between systems, cooperation between intention and biology. This cooperation is slower than force, but it is more sustainable. Sustainability matters. Short-term solutions that destabilize long-term balance are not solutions. They are delays. The microbiome reminds us of this repeatedly. It also reminds us that individuality does not require isolation. You are not diminished by the fact that microbes influence your internal state. You are enriched by the complexity of the system that supports your existence. Your thoughts are still yours. Your feelings are still meaningful. Your choices are still real. They simply arise from a deeper foundation than was once acknowledged. This deeper foundation does not threaten identity. It grounds it. Identity becomes something that unfolds rather than something that is imposed. It adapts rather than resists. This adaptive view of self is not passive. It is responsive. Responsiveness is intelligence. The microbiome is intelligent in this sense, not conscious, not intentional, but responsive to conditions in ways that preserve system integrity. Human intelligence evolved within this responsiveness. The brain did not replace biological regulation. It extended it. Thought is regulation made abstract. Once this is understood, the tension between science and experience softens. Biology does not negate meaning. It enables it. Meaning arises when systems align enough to allow reflection. This alignment reduces meaning because survival takes precedence. The microbiome influences where that balance sits. This is not destiny, it is probability. Probabilities can be shifted, not through force but through consistency. Small changes applied repeatedly alter system state. This is true for microbial ecosystems and for habits of thought. Over time, coherence emerges. Coherence does not eliminate difficulty. It reduces chaos. In coherence, problems are faced one at a time. In chaos, everything feels like a problem. The microbiome influences which state dominates. Understanding this allows for gentler expectations. You do not need to optimize your biology. You do not need to control every variable. You need to support balance enough for regulation to work. That is sufficient. This sufficiency is often overlooked in cultures that equate worth with performance. Biology does not operate on that logic. Biology operates on survival and adaptation. The microbiome exemplifies this wisdom quietly, continuously, without ideology. It does not promise transcendence. It offers stability, and stability, once present, allows growth to occur naturally. As this journey concludes, the microbiome stands not as a revelation that overturns everything we thought we knew, but as a missing piece that makes existing knowledge make sense. The brain thinks, the body supports, the microbiome mediates. Together they form a system capable of experience, choice, and reflection. This system is fragile when strained and resilient when supported. Understanding that difference is not enlightenment, it is literacy. Biological literacy. And with literacy comes the ability to respond wisely rather than react blindly. The second brain does not demand attention, it rewards it. By listening, not obsessively, but respectfully, one can live with fewer internal battles and more internal coherence. That coherence is not perfection, it is alignment. And alignment, in living systems, is as close to harmony as nature ever promises. As this exploration reaches its final stage, the microbiome no longer appears as a separate topic or a surprising addition to human biology. It dissolves into something more fundamental, a lens through which the nature of life, mind, and health can be understood with greater realism and less illusion. What the microbiome ultimately teaches is restraint. Not restraint in behavior, but restraint in explanation. For a long time, humans have searched for single causes behind complex outcomes. A gene explains a disease. A thought explains an emotion. A decision explains a life trajectory. These explanations are comforting because they imply control. If one cause exists, one fix must exist as well. The microbiome quietly undermines this hope. It shows that living systems do not operate through single causes. They operate through conditions. Outcomes emerge not because one thing happened, but because many things aligned or failed to align over time. This realization does not weaken science, it matures it. Mature understanding accepts that prediction has limits, that control is partial, and that adaptation is more realistic than domination. The microbiome embodies this maturity. It does not yield easily to manipulation. It responds to patterns, consistency, and context. This is not a flaw, it is a feature of resilient systems. Once this is understood, the goal of health shifts. Health is no longer a permanent state to be achieved and maintained through constant vigilance. It is a dynamic range, a capacity to absorb stress, recover from disruption, and reorganize without collapsing. The microbiome contributes directly to this capacity. A diverse, balanced microbial ecosystem buffers inflammatory responses, stabilizes metabolic signaling, and supports neural regulation. When this buffering capacity is strong, life's inevitable stresses do not push the system into chronic dysregulation. When it is weak, even small challenges feel overwhelming. This explains why people with similar lives can experience radically different levels of strain. It is not that one is stronger, it is that one system is better supported. Understanding this reduces the moral weight placed on struggle. Struggle is not proof of inadequacy, it is often proof of depletion. Depletion can be addressed, but only if it is recognized. The microbiome also reframes progress. Progress is often imagined as linear improvement, more energy, more clarity, more control. Biological progress is cyclical. Systems improve, destabilize, and restabilize at higher levels of integration. Setbacks are not regressions, they are part of adaptation. This perspective is essential for long-term change. Without it, individuals interpret normal fluctuations as failure and abandon efforts prematurely. The microbiome teaches patience not as a virtue, but as a necessity. It also teaches proportion. Not every discomfort requires intervention. Not every signal indicates pathology. Some fluctuations are normal responses to variation. Over-intervention can be as destabilizing as neglect. The challenge is discernment, knowing when to act and when to allow systems to self-regulate. This discernment cannot be automated. It requires attention to patterns rather than events, attention to trends rather than moments, attention to relationships rather than isolated variables. The microbiome responds to this kind of attention. It does not reward obsession, it rewards steadiness. This lesson applies beyond biology. Human relationships, communities, and institutions also function as ecosystems. They collapse under excessive control and recover under supportive conditions. Diversity strengthens them, uniformity weakens them. The microbiome is not an exception, it is an illustration. This illustration helps explain why modern life produces so much fatigue, anxiety, and fragmentation despite unprecedented technological capacity. Systems optimized for speed, efficiency, and output often sacrifice resilience. The body reflects this sacrifice. The microbiome bears the cost. Recognizing this does not require rejecting modern life. It requires adjusting expectations. You cannot live at maximum output indefinitely without biological consequence. No ecosystem can. The microbiome enforces this truth quietly. When its signals are ignored, they escalate. When they are respected, balance returns gradually. This escalation is often misinterpreted as malfunction. It is feedback. Understanding feedback reduces fear. Fear arises when the body feels unpredictable. Predictability restores safety. Safety allows regulation. The microbiome contributes to safety by stabilizing internal environments. When stability is lost, the nervous system enters defensive mode. This defensive mode prioritizes survival over reflection. Many mental struggles arise from prolonged defense. Restoring balance allows the system to exit defense and re-enter growth. This is not a motivational slogan, it is physiology. The microbiome does not create meaning. It enables the conditions under which meaning can be processed. Meaning requires spare capacity. Spare capacity requires regulation. Regulation requires balance. Balance requires cooperation between systems. The microbiome is one of those systems. Understanding this changes how people relate to effort. Effort without support becomes strain. Effort with support becomes effective. This distinction explains why some people burn out while others sustain momentum under similar demands. It is not because one wants it more. It is because one system can handle it. This perspective does not eliminate aspiration, it grounds it. Ambition that ignores biology is self-defeating. Ambition that works with biology becomes sustainable. The microbiome quietly insists on this alignment, does not respond to pressure, it responds to care. Care in this context is not indulgence, it is maintenance. Just as complex machines require regular maintenance to function, complex organisms require ongoing support. But organisms differ from machines in one crucial way. They adapt. They remember. The microbiome remembers patterns. It remembers deprivation, stress, nourishment, and recovery. Its memory shapes future responses. This memory is not conscious, but it is real. Healing, therefore, is not erasure. It is repatterning. Repatterning takes time. There is no shortcut around this. The microbiome offers no hacks. It offers realism. Realism is not pessimism. It is clarity without illusion. With clarity comes better decisions. Better decisions lead to better conditions. Better conditions allow systems to stabilize. Stabilized systems regain flexibility. Flexibility is freedom. This is the quiet arc that runs through everything the microbiome reveals. Freedom is not the absence of constraint, it is the presence of flexibility within constraint. The body always has constraints. The microbiome helps determine how narrow or wide those constraints feel. When balance is lost, options shrink. When balance is restored, options expand. This expansion is subtle but profound. It affects how problems are perceived, how emotions are regulated, and how meaning is constructed. The second brain does not think, but it helps determine how easily thinking occurs. This is not a threat to human dignity, it is an acknowledgement of human complexity. Dignity does not require simplicity, it requires truth. The truth is that humans are ecosystems. Ecosystems require care, not domination. This care does not demand perfection, it demands consistency. Consistent nourishment, consistent rest, consistent stress management, consistent connection. These are not lifestyle trends, they are biological necessities. Ignoring them produces predictable outcomes. Respecting them produces stability. Stability is not stagnation. It is the platform from which growth emerges. The microbiome, in revealing this, does not ask humans to become something new. It asks them to remember something old, that life is cooperative, that balance matters, that systems thrive when supported rather than forced. These truths were always present. They were simply obscured by models that favoured control over understanding. Now, with greater insight, those models can be refined. The second brain becomes part of a larger picture, not a replacement for existing knowledge, but an integration point that makes sense of contradictions. Mind and body were never separate. They were separated conceptually. The microbiome closes that gap. It does so without drama, without ideology, without promise of transcendence. It offers something quieter and more reliable. Coherence. Coherence between biology and experience. Coherence between effort and outcome. Coherence between expectation and capacity. Within coherence, life becomes more navigable, not easier, but intelligible. And intelligibility is often the difference between endurance and collapse. The microbiome does not change what it means to be human. It reminds us what it has always meant. To be human is to be embedded, adaptive, limited, resilient, and shaped by forces both seen and unseen. Recognizing this does not reduce agency, it makes agency usable. Because when you understand the system you are part of, you stop fighting it blindly and start working with it, patiently, realistically, and with a respect for complexity that no simple explanation could ever replace. As this long exploration comes to its final integration, one truth stands out with increasing clarity. The microbiome does not introduce a new mystery into human life. It resolves an old one. It explains why so many attempts to understand behavior, health, and identity felt incomplete even when they were technically correct. They were correct in parts. They were incomplete as wholes. The human story has often been told as a conflict between mind and body, thought against instinct, reason against biology, control against impulse. This narrative shaped medicine, psychology, and culture itself. The microbiome dissolves this conflict. It shows that mind and body were never opposing forces. They were layers of the same system communicating through different languages. Electrical signals, chemical messengers, immune responses, and microbial metabolites all participate in the same conversation. Nothing here is symbolic. It is functional. This realization shifts how suffering is interpreted. When a system is overwhelmed, it does not fail silently. It expresses distress through symptoms: fatigue, anxiety, digestive disruption, irritability, brain fog. These are not random malfunctions. They are adaptive responses signaling that regulation has been pushed beyond capacity. For decades, many of these signals were treated as isolated problems. A symptom was identified and suppressed. Often, suppression worked temporarily, but the underlying strain remained. The microbiome reveals why suppression alone so often fails. Suppressing a signal does not remove the cause, it shifts the load elsewhere. When the gut cannot signal distress, the immune system may amplify inflammation. When inflammation is dampened, neural signaling may destabilize. The system adapts, but the imbalance persists. This is not a failure of medicine, it is a limitation of reduction. Reduction works when causes are simple, living systems rarely are. Understanding this does not mean abandoning intervention, it means embedding intervention within context. Medication can reduce suffering, therapy can change interpretation, lifestyle changes can restore balance. None of these are sufficient alone for many conditions. Together they form a coherent approach. The microbiome becomes the connective tissue between them. It explains why therapy works better when sleep improves, why medication is more effective when inflammation is reduced, why dietary changes influence mood even when beliefs remain unchanged. These effects are not coincidences, they are integrations. Integration is the key word. The future of health does not belong to a single discipline. It belongs to frameworks that can hold complexity without collapsing into confusion. The microbiome offers such a framework. It does not provide certainty. It provides orientation. Orientation allows navigation even when the destination is unclear. This is essential for chronic conditions, mental health, and long-term well-being. Areas where certainty is rare and adaptation is constant. The microbiome also reshapes how people relate to time. Modern life often compresses time. Productivity demands immediacy. Improvement is expected quickly. Biological systems resist this compression. The microbiome operates on slower rhythms. Its adaptations unfold over weeks and months. Its memory persists beyond conscious intention. When time is respected, healing becomes possible. When time is denied, systems harden into defensive states. This is not philosophical, it is biological. The nervous system requires safety to downregulate. Safety emerges from predictability. Predictability requires time. The microbiome reinforces this requirement relentlessly. It cannot be rushed. This truth is uncomfortable in cultures that equate speed with value, but it is also liberating. It removes the pressure to fix everything immediately. It replaces urgency with consistency. Consistency is powerful. Small, repeated inputs reshape ecosystems more reliably than dramatic interventions. This applies to microbes and to habits of thought. Over time, coherence emerges. Coherence does not eliminate difficulty, it reduces volatility. In reduced volatility, insight becomes possible. This is why many people report clarity after prolonged periods of stability rather than after intense effort. The microbiome contributes to this clarity by stabilizing the internal environment in which thinking occurs. Thinking is not just a mental act, it is a metabolic one. Neurons consume energy, respond to chemical gradients, and adjust to inflammatory signals. When the internal environment is chaotic, thought becomes effortful. When it is stable, thought flows. This does not make thought mechanical, it makes it embodied. Embodiment does not diminish meaning, it anchors it. Meaning that floats without anchor becomes abstraction. Meaning grounded in bodily regulation becomes sustainable. The microbiome supports this grounding. It does not create values or purpose. It creates the conditions under which values and purpose can be engaged without constant struggle. This distinction matters. Many existential crises are not philosophical at their core, they are physiological states interpreted philosophically. When energy is depleted, meaning feels distant. When inflammation is high, hope narrows. When regulation returns, perspective widens. This does not invalidate existential questions, it contextualizes their urgency. Understanding this allows people to approach meaning with patience rather than desperation. The microbiome, in this sense, acts as a moderator between biology and interpretation. It prevents the system from amplifying every challenge into a crisis. When balanced, when imbalanced, everything feels like a crisis. This amplification is not a failure of character, it is a state of the system. Recognizing this reduces shame. Shame thrives in misunderstanding. Understanding dissolves it. The microbiome also introduces humility into scientific ambition. For decades, biology pursued mastery. The goal was to map every pathway, control every variable, and predict every outcome. The microbiome resists this ambition. Its complexity defies full control. Its adaptability undermines static models. Its individuality resists standardization. This resistance is not an obstacle. It is a reminder. Life is not designed to be mastered. It is designed to be sustained. Sustainability requires respect for complexity. The microbiome demands that respect. It also invites cooperation across fields that once operated separately. Neuroscience, immunology, microbiology, psychology, nutrition, and sociology all converge around the same question: how do systems maintain balance under pressure? This convergence is not theoretical. It is already shaping research, treatment, and policy. The microbiome acts as a bridge. Bridges do not replace destinations, they connect them. This connection is perhaps its greatest contribution. By connecting internal experience to external conditions, it dissolves the illusion that suffering is purely personal. It reveals the systemic nature of health and illness. This revelation carries ethical weight. If environments contribute to dysregulation, then responsibility extends beyond individuals. Work culture, food systems, urban design, and social stability become health variables. Ignoring this is convenient. Addressing it is difficult. The microbiome does not offer political solutions. It offers biological evidence that health emerges from alignment between organisms and environments. When alignment fails, systems struggle. This is not moral failure, it is ecological mismatch. Understanding mismatch allows correction. Correction does not require perfection. It requires adjustment. The microbiome thrives on adjustment. It adapts continuously. This adaptability is mirrored in human resilience when systems are supported. Resilience is not endurance without rest. It is the capacity to recover. Recovery depends on regulation. Regulation depends on balance. Balance depends on cooperation. The microbiome embodies this chain. As this exploration reaches its conclusion, the second brain no longer appears as a mysterious force shaping human life behind the scenes. It appears as a familiar principle expressed at a microscopic scale. Life is collaborative. No part exists alone. No function emerges in isolation. Stability arises from interaction, not dominance. The brain thinks, the body supports, the microbiome mediates. Together they form a system capable of awareness, reflection, and choice, not because any one part is supreme, but because the whole is coordinated. This coordination is fragile under strain and resilient under care. Care is not indulgence. It is maintenance. Maintenance is not weakness. It is wisdom. The microbiome does not demand attention. It responds to it. By acknowledging its role, humans do not lose agency. They gain orientation. Orientation allows navigation through complexity without the illusion of control. This is not a loss, it is maturity. The second brain does not redefine humanity. It reveals the depth of what humanity has always been. A living system thinking inside itself, shaped by history, environment, and cooperation at every scale. Once this is understood, the desire to dominate the body softens. The impulse to listen strengthens. Health becomes less about conquest and more about relationship. And in that relationship, something stabilizes. Not perfection, not certainty, but coherence. And coherence, in a world of constant change, is not a small achievement. It is the foundation upon which everything else becomes possible. As this final layer settles into place, the microbiome no longer feels like a subject to be explained, debated, or even emphasized. It becomes something quieter, a background truth that changes how everything else is interpreted. Not because it is dramatic, but because it is unavoidable. The most enduring insight of the microbiome is that health is not a state you achieve once and keep. It is a continuous negotiation between competing demands, limited resources, and adaptive systems that never stop responding to their environment. This negotiation is not conscious, but it is intelligent. For much of modern history, intelligence was defined narrowly as reasoning, calculation, and conscious decision-making. The brain was seen as the seat of intelligence, while the rest of the body was reduced to support infrastructure. The microbiome disrupts this hierarchy. It demonstrates that intelligence exists wherever systems respond appropriately to changing conditions. Microbes adjust metabolism in response to nutrients. Immune cells adjust signaling in response to microbial cues. Neural circuits adjust sensitivity based on chemical context. None of this requires awareness, it requires regulation. This broader definition of intelligence dissolves the false elevation of thought over biology. Thinking becomes one form of regulation among many, not a sovereign authority ruling over passive matter. This does not degrade thought, it situates it. When thought is understood as embedded within regulation, it becomes easier to understand why insight alone does not always produce change. Insight is information. Regulation is capacity. A system without capacity cannot implement insight. The microbiome plays a role in that capacity. By stabilizing immune signaling, metabolic balance, and neurotransmitter availability, it creates the internal conditions under which insight can be translated into action. This explains a paradox many people experience, knowing what to do but being unable to do it. This gap is not hypocrisy or weakness. It is a mismatch between intention and capacity. The microbiome does not close this gap by force. It narrows it by restoring balance. This reframing transforms how effort is understood. Effort is not a pure act of will, it is an expenditure of regulated energy. When systems are depleted, effort becomes disproportionately costly. When systems are supported, effort feels natural. This distinction matters deeply in how people judge themselves and others. Moralizing effort ignores biology. Understanding effort respects it. The microbiome provides the missing context. It also reshapes how failure is interpreted. Failure, in a systems perspective, is often not failure at all. It is feedback that capacity has been exceeded. Ignoring that feedback leads to collapse. Responding to it leads to adaptation. Adaptation is not weakness, it is survival. This reframing is particularly important in a world that equates constant productivity with worth. The microbiome exposes the biological cost of this equation. Living systems require recovery cycles. When recovery is denied, regulation breaks down. Inflammation rises, mood destabilizes. Cognitive clarity declines. These are not signs of laziness, they are signs of strain. Strain accumulates quietly until it becomes impossible to ignore. The microbiome does not cause this accumulation, it reflects it. It reflects long-term patterns more reliably than short-term metrics. This is why people often feel off long before clinical markers appear. The ecosystem is shifting before breakdown becomes visible. Listening early prevents escalation, but listening requires a culture that values signals rather than suppresses them. This is where the implications of microbiome science extend beyond individual health and into collective values. Societies that ignore biological limits produce widespread dysregulation. Individuals internalize this dysregulation as personal failure. Shame replaces understanding. Pressure replaces care. The microbiome does not participate in shame. It responds only to conditions. This neutrality is instructive. It suggests that health improves not when people are pressured to perform better, but when conditions are shaped to support regulation. This does not mean eliminating challenge. Challenge is necessary for growth, but challenge without recovery is damage. The microbiome is sensitive to this balance. Short-term stress can enhance resilience. Chronic stress erodes it. The difference is not intensity, but duration and recovery. This insight is ancient, but it was forgotten in cultures that prized endurance without rest. The microbiome restores this memory. It also reframes prevention. Prevention is not simply avoiding disease. It is maintaining adaptive capacity. It is ensuring systems can respond flexibly rather than rigidly. Flexibility is the hallmark of health. The microbiome contributes to flexibility by maintaining diversity. diversity allows multiple pathways to compensate when one fails. Uniform systems collapse under strain. This principle applies everywhere. Monocultures in agriculture are vulnerable. Monolithic institutions are fragile. Uniform biological systems destabilize easily. The microbiome embodies diversity as strength. Understanding this shifts focus away from optimization toward resilience. Optimization seeks maximum output. Resilience seeks sustained function. The microbiome favors resilience. This preference challenges modern ideals, but it aligns with reality. Reality is unpredictable. Systems that survive unpredictability are those that can adapt. The microbiome adapts constantly. When supported, it adapts in ways that stabilize the host. When neglected, it adapts in ways that protect itself, sometimes at the host's expense. This is not malice, it is survival logic. Recognizing this logic helps explain why extreme interventions often backfire. Systems respond defensively when threatened. Gentle, sustained support produces cooperation. This is as true in biology as it is in human relationships. The microbiome is not a separate intelligence competing with the mind, it is a regulatory partner operating on timescales the mind often ignores. Mind operates in moments, microbiome operates in patterns. Aligning these timescales reduces friction. Friction is exhausting. Reducing friction frees energy. Freed energy becomes capacity for creativity, connection, and reflection. This is why balance feels expansive, not euphoric, expansive. Expansiveness allows choice. Choice without capacity is illusion. Capacity without choice is inertia. Health requires both. The microbiome supports capacity. The mind exercises choice. This partnership is not equal, but it is mutual. Understanding this partnership reduces the urge to dominate the body. Dominance creates resistance. Cooperation creates stability. This is not passive acceptance. It is strategic alignment. The microbiome teaches alignment through consequence, not instruction. When alignment is lost, signals intensify. When alignment is restored, signals quiet. Silence is not emptiness. It is coherence. Coherence is what allows subtle experiences, curiosity, joy, meaning, to register without being drowned out by distress. These experiences are often treated as luxuries. Biology treats them as indicators. They indicate that systems are no longer operating in survival mode. Survival mode is loud, growth mode is quiet. The microbiome helps determine which mode dominates. This does not mean life becomes effortless when balance is achieved. Challenges remain, loss occurs, uncertainty persists, but challenges are faced with more flexibility. Loss is processed with more integration. Uncertainty does not automatically trigger collapse. This is the practical outcome of regulation, not happiness. Stability. Stability is underrated. Stability allows suffering to be metabolized rather than accumulated. Accumulated suffering hardens systems. Metabolized suffering transforms them. The microbiome contributes to this metabolic process. It does not eliminate pain. It prevents pain from becoming chronic dysfunction. This distinction is crucial. As this exploration concludes, the second brain no longer feels like a metaphor meant to provoke curiosity. It feels like a description of a reality that was always present but poorly articulated. The body was always thinking in its own way. The mind was always embodied. The microbiome makes this explicit. This explicitness does not demand obsession, it invites respect. Respect for limits, respect for rhythms, respect for recovery. These are not spiritual ideals. They are biological necessities. The future of understanding health, behavior, and identity will not hinge on discovering one more mechanism or one more molecule. It will hinge on integrating what is already known into coherent models that reflect how living systems actually function. The microbiome has forced that integration. It has done so quietly, without ideology, without promises of transcendence. It has simply revealed the conditions under which humans think, feel, and endure. Once revealed, those conditions cannot be unseen. They become part of the background knowledge through which experience is interpreted. This interpretation does not diminish life, it grounds it. And grounding in a world that moves too fast and demands too much may be the most stabilizing insight of all. Not because it tells us what to do, but because it reminds us what systems need in order to keep going, steadily, imperfectly, and with enough balance to allow meaning to survive alongside complexity. That is not a small realization, it is a foundational one. As this final reflection unfolds, the microbiome no longer feels like a topic to be concluded, summarized, or neatly resolved. It remains present as a quiet reframing of what it means to live inside a body that is always responding, always adapting, and never truly separate from its environment. The most enduring shift brought by understanding the microbiome is not scientific, it is perceptual. Once it is understood that regulation precedes intention, the capacity precedes effort, and that balance precedes clarity, the relationship between a person and their inner life subtly changes. Expectations soften, interpretation deepens, urgency gives way to attentiveness. This does not make life easier, it makes it intelligible. For much of modern history, human experience has been filtered through ideals of control, the belief that clarity should be constant, that motivation should be reliable, that emotion should obey reason. When these ideals fail, distress follows not only from the difficulty itself, but from the confusion surrounding it. The microbiome removes much of that confusion. It reveals that inconsistency is not a flaw in the system. It is a feature of living regulation. Systems oscillate. They respond to input, they recalibrate after disruption. Expecting linearity from them is a misunderstanding. This misunderstanding has shaped countless narratives of self-blame. A person feels exhausted and assumes laziness. A person feels anxious and assumes weakness. A person feels unmotivated and assumes failure. The microbiome reframes these assumptions without excusing disengagement. It replaces accusation with inquiry. Inquiry asks what the system is responding to. Accusation assumes intent. Biology rarely operates on intent. This reframing is not absolution, it is accuracy. Accuracy matters because it allows intervention at the correct level. Addressing motivation when the system is inflamed fails. Addressing anxiety when sleep is disrupted fails. Addressing clarity when nutrition is depleted fails. These failures reinforce the illusion that effort is insufficient. The microbiome dissolves that illusion. Effort without capacity is unsustainable. Capacity without effort is unused. Health emerges when the two align. Alignment does not require perfection, it requires responsiveness. Responsiveness is the ability to detect change early and adjust gently. The microbiome is exquisitely responsive. It reacts to patterns long before conscious awareness registers distress. This early response is protective. When early signals are respected, systems recalibrate smoothly. When they are ignored, signals intensify. This escalation is often labeled as breakdown, but breakdown is often delayed adaptation. The system is doing what it can with the information and resources available. Understanding this changes how breakdown is experienced. Instead of panic, there is recognition. Instead of urgency, there is prioritization. Recognition allows space. Prioritization restores focus. The microbiome does not demand immediate action, it demands consistent conditions. Consistency is undervalued in cultures that glorify intensity. But intensity exhausts ecosystems, consistency sustains them. This lesson extends beyond biology into behavior. Small, repeated actions matter more than dramatic interventions. Stable routines matter more than bursts of effort. Predictability matters more than novelty when systems are strained. The microbiome enforces this principle quietly, without negotiation. It cannot be persuaded by ambition. It responds to rhythm. Rhythm governs digestion, sleep, hormone release, immune signaling, and microbial cycles. When rhythm is disrupted, regulation falters. When rhythm is restored, balance returns gradually. This is not mysticism, it is physiology. The body evolved around cycles: light and dark, feast and scarcity, exertion and rest. The microbiome evolved alongside these cycles. Modern life disrupts them continuously. Artificial light blurs night and day. Constant availability blurs work and rest. Processed food blurs nourishment and consumption. The microbiome reflects these blurs as dysregulation. Understanding this does not require abandoning modern life. It requires restoring anchors. Anchors are not restrictions, they are stabilizers. Regular sleep times, regular meals, regular periods of disengagement. These anchors reduce uncertainty at the biological level. Reduced uncertainty lowers stress signaling. Lower stress stabilizes microbial environments. Stable microbial environments support neural regulation. The chain is long. Ignoring any link weakens the whole. The microbiome also reshapes how people relate to discomfort. Discomfort is often treated as an enemy to be eliminated, but some discomfort is adaptive. Hunger prompts nourishment. Fatigue prompts rest. Emotional pain prompts reflection. The problem is not discomfort. It is chronic, unresolved discomfort. The microbiome helps distinguish between the two. When discomfort resolves with appropriate response, regulation strengthens. When discomfort persists despite response, deeper imbalance may be present. This distinction reduces overreaction. Not every signal requires intervention. Some require patience. The microbiome thrives under patience. This patience is not passive resignation. It is informed waiting. Waiting for systems to integrate changes rather than forcing outcomes prematurely. Premature force often produces temporary improvement followed by rebound. This rebound is not failure, it is defensive adaptation. The microbiome adapts defensively when threatened. It cooperates when supported. This cooperation is not sentimental, it is functional. Understanding this transforms the language of self-improvement. Instead of fixing the body, one begins to support it. Instead of overcoming limitations, one works within them. Instead of hacking biology, one aligns with it. This alignment feels less heroic. It is more effective. The microbiome also reframes responsibility in a grounded way. Responsibility is not absolute control over outcomes. It is stewardship over conditions. You are not responsible for every signal your body produces. You are responsible for how you respond to those signals over time. This distinction reduces guilt without removing accountability. You did not choose your baseline biology. You do choose how you treat it. Treatment here does not mean intervention alone. It means environment, routine, and care. Care is not indulgence. It is maintenance of a system that did not ask to exist but must be sustained once it does. This is not a moral argument, it is a biological one. The microbiome does not reward virtue or punish vice. It responds to inputs. Inputs accumulate. Accumulation shapes state. State shapes experience. Experience shapes interpretation. The cycle continues. Understanding this cycle allows interruption at multiple points. You may not be able to change everything at once, but you can change something consistently. Consistency compounds. The microbiome is proof of compounding effects. Tiny microbial shifts, repeated over time, reshape the entire ecosystem. Tiny changes in routine, repeated over time, reshape capacity. This is not inspiring in a cinematic sense. It is empowering in a realistic one. Empowerment without illusion is rare. The microbiome offers that. It does not promise transcendence. It promises manageability. Manageability allows life to be lived without constant crisis. Crisis is not always external. Often it is internal misalignment, interpreted as threat. The microbiome reduces this misalignment by restoring coherence between systems. Coherence is not happiness, It is stability under fluctuation. Stability allows sadness without collapse, stress without panic, effort without exhaustion. This is what people often mean when they say they want to feel okay. Okay is not nothing. Okay is regulated enough to continue. The microbiome contributes to this state quietly, invisibly, and persistently. It does not announce success. It simply stops escalating signals. Silence, in this context, is not emptiness. It is integration. Integration allows attention to move outward again, toward relationships, creativity, and meaning. When systems are dysregulated, attention collapses inward. Every sensation becomes urgent. Every fluctuation feels threatening. The microbiome helps determine where attention rests. This is why chronic dysregulation feels so consuming. Understanding this fosters empathy. Empathy for others whose systems are strained. Empathy for oneself during periods of instability. Empathy is not permissiveness. It is accurate perception without judgment. The microbiome demands accuracy. It strips away narratives that blame individuals for systemic strain. It exposes how environments, routines, and patterns shape outcomes over time. This exposure is uncomfortable. It removes convenient explanations, but it replaces them with workable ones. Workable explanations lead to workable responses. The ultimate value of understanding the microbiome is not that it explains everything. It is that it explains enough to reduce unnecessary suffering. Suffering caused by confusion. Suffering caused by misattribution. Suffering caused by impossible expectations. These forms of suffering are preventable. The microbiome helps prevent them by revealing how limited control actually is and how much influence remains possible within those limits. Influence without illusion is freedom. Freedom is not the absence of constraint. It is the ability to move within constraint without constant resistance. The microbiome teaches this lesson at a microscopic scale. Life is constraint. Adaptation is freedom. Humans have always adapted through cooperation with each other, with environments, with invisible systems that made survival possible long before awareness existed. The microbiome is one of those systems. It did not arrive with modern science. It was always there. What changed is perception, and perception, once changed, cannot return to ignorance. You cannot unknow that thoughts arise within a body, that bodies respond to environments, that environments shape biology. This knowledge does not reduce wonder, it deepens it. It replaces mystery with awe grounded in reality. Reality understood clearly is not less meaningful. It is more demanding. It asks for patience. It asks for care. It asks for realism. These are not glamorous demands, they are sustaining ones. As this exploration concludes, there is no final command, no takeaway slogan, no prescription to follow. There is only a reframing. You are not broken when you struggle. You are responding to conditions. Change the conditions slowly, consistently, and respectfully. And the system adapts. Not perfectly. Not instantly. But enough. Enough to continue. Enough to grow. Enough to live without constant internal opposition. The microbiome does not solve the problem of being human. It clarifies it. Being human means living inside a system that must be cared for, not conquered. And once that is understood, the relationship with oneself becomes less adversarial, less confused, and quietly more sustainable. One small, consistent adjustment at a time. As the final perspective settles, the microbiome no longer appears as a scientific subject running parallel to human experience. It becomes inseparable from it, not as a force to be managed or optimized, but as a reminder of how living systems endure when they are allowed to function as systems rather than machines. At this stage, the most important shift is no longer conceptual, it is relational. Understanding the microbiome changes how a person relates to their body over time. For many people, the body has been treated as something to overcome. Productivity is achieved by ignoring fatigue. Emotional control is achieved by suppressing discomfort. Success is achieved by pushing past signals rather than responding to them. This approach can work briefly, but biology keeps score. The microbiome is one of the systems that keeps that score. It records patterns of nourishment and deprivation, stress and recovery, consistency and chaos. It does not judge those patterns, it responds to them. This response is cumulative. A single night of poor sleep does little. A single stressful week is manageable. A single dietary lapse is inconsequential. But chronic patterns leave biological signatures. These signatures influence how easily the system returns to balance. This realization alters how time is perceived. Health is no longer a snapshot, it is a trajectory. Where the system ends up depends less on isolated decisions and more on the direction of repeated ones. The microbiome embodies this principle clearly. It changes slowly, it remembers patterns, it resists abrupt correction. This resistance frustrates quick-fix thinking but supports long-term stability. Understanding this reframes patience from passivity to intelligence. Patience is not waiting for improvement, it is allowing systems to integrate change at the pace they can sustain. This pace is not negotiable. The microbiome does not accelerate because of urgency. It responds to consistency. This consistency is not glamorous. It rarely produces dramatic short-term results, but it reshapes the baseline. Baseline matters. Baseline determines how much effort is required to function. It determines how quickly stress escalates. It determines how easily clarity returns after disruption. Much of what people call mental strength is simply a stable baseline. The microbiome contributes to that stability by regulating inflammatory tone, metabolic efficiency, and neurochemical balance. When baseline is stable, challenges feel manageable. When baseline is unstable, the same challenges feel overwhelming. This is not a personal failing, it is system state. Recognizing system state reduces unnecessary self-conflict. Instead of asking why something feels difficult, one can ask what has shifted. This question invites curiosity rather than condemnation. Curiosity is biologically safer than judgment. Judgment activates threat responses. Threat responses destabilize regulation. Destabilization amplifies symptoms. Curiosity lowers threat. Lower threat supports regulation. Regulation quiets symptoms. The microbiome responds to this shift indirectly. It does not detect thoughts. It detects hormones, immune signals, and metabolic changes that accompany mental states. By reducing internal threat, the environment the microbiome inhabits becomes less hostile. This is one way psychological care translates into biological care. The separation between the two was always artificial. The microbiome exposes that separation as a convenience rather than a truth. Another subtle shift occurs in how progress is measured. Progress is often equated with upward movement, more productivity, more clarity, more energy. But biological progress is often horizontal. It appears as increased tolerance, faster recovery, reduced volatility. These changes are easy to overlook because they do not announce themselves, but they matter more than peak performance. Peak performance is fragile. Resilience is durable. The microbiome supports durability. This durability allows individuals to navigate inevitable disruptions, illness, stress, loss, without system collapse. Collapse is not a dramatic failure, it is prolonged dysregulation. Avoiding collapse is not about eliminating hardship, it is about maintaining enough regulation to metabolize hardship without freezing or fragmenting. The microbiome is deeply involved in this metabolic process. It influences how inflammation resolves, how energy is allocated, how neural signaling stabilizes after stress. This means that recovery is not just psychological, it is biological. Biological recovery requires input. Sleep, nourishment, predictability, and reduced threat are not luxuries, they are recovery mechanisms. Ignoring them does not make recovery stronger, it delays it. The microbiome enforces this delay relentlessly. When recovery is denied, signals intensify. Fatigue deepens, mood narrows, cognitive flexibility declines. These are not punishments, they are reminders. Understanding them as reminders changes how they are received. Instead of frustration, there is information. Information allows response. Response restores alignment. Alignment reduces friction. This chain is simple but not easy. It requires relinquishing the belief that willpower alone can override biology. Willpower is a tool. It is not a foundation. Foundations are built from conditions. The microbiome is part of that foundation. Another important shift emerges in how people relate to health narratives. Modern health culture often promotes extremes, strict regimens, total elimination, rigid routines. These approaches promise clarity through control. Biology responds poorly to rigidity. Rigid systems lack redundancy. When disrupted, they fail catastrophically. Flexible systems bend. The microbiome favors flexibility. It thrives under diversity, not restriction. It adapts under gradual change, not shock. This does not mean boundaries are unnecessary. It means boundaries must allow variation, consistency without rigidity, structure without suffocation. This balance is difficult in environments that reward intensity, but intensity without recovery erodes resilience. The microbiome exposes this erosion early. Those early signals are often dismissed. Understanding the microbiome invites listening sooner. Listening sooner prevents escalation. This applies not only to physical health, but to emotional patterns as well. Emotions often escalate because early signals are ignored or overridden. By the time they become disruptive, systems are already strained. The microbiome influences emotional thresholds by modulating inflammatory signaling and neurotransmitter balance. When thresholds are lowered, emotions feel more extreme. Restoring thresholds requires restoring balance. Balance is not achieved through force. It is achieved through consistency. Consistency in sleep, consistency in nourishment, consistency in stress exposure and recovery. This is not discipline in the punitive sense. It is rhythm. Rhythm stabilizes living systems. The microbiome evolved within rhythm. Modern life disrupts rhythm constantly. Artificial light extends day. Digital stimulation eliminates pauses. Work cycles ignore biological limits. The microbiome reflects this disruption as dysregulation. Understanding this reframes fatigue not as weakness, but as a signal that rhythm has been lost. Restoring rhythm restores regulation. This restoration is gradual. Expecting instant improvement creates disappointment. Disappointment increases stress. Stress destabilizes systems. The loop repeats. Breaking the loop requires expectation adjustment. Expectation adjustment is not lowering standards. It is aligning them with reality. Reality is that living systems change slowly. The microbiome does not rush. In respecting that pace, individuals often experience a subtle but profound shift. Life feels less adversarial. The body stops feeling like an obstacle. It feels like a partner, sometimes demanding, sometimes uncooperative, but always responsive. This partnership changes how challenges are approached. Instead of asking how to push harder, one asks how to support better. Support does not eliminate challenge. It makes challenge survivable. This is the difference between stress and trauma. Stress is challenge with recovery. Trauma is challenge without recovery. The microbiome influences which side of that line experiences fall on. By supporting recovery, it prevents stress from becoming trauma. This prevention is not absolute, but it is significant. The microbiome does not offer immunity to suffering, it offers resilience in the face of it. Resilience is often misunderstood as toughness. In biological terms, resilience is flexibility. Flexible systems adapt, rigid systems break. The microbiome encourages flexibility by maintaining diversity. Diversity is not excess, it is insurance. Insurance against unpredictability. The world is unpredictable. Living systems evolve to expect that. When modern structures attempt to eliminate unpredictability through control, they often create fragility. The microbiome reflects this fragility internally. Understanding this invites a different relationship with uncertainty. Uncertainty is not an enemy to be eliminated, it is a condition to be adapted to. Adaptation requires capacity. Capacity requires regulation. Regulation requires balance. Balance requires cooperation. The microbiome is one of the systems that make cooperation possible at a biological level. Recognizing its role does not demand obsession, it demands respect. Respect for limits, respect for rhythms, respect for recovery. These forms of respect are not sentimental, they are functional. They allow systems to endure. Endurance is not endurance through force, it is endurance through adjustment. The microbiome models this adjustment constantly. It responds to what is available. It reallocates resources. It shifts composition. When supported, these shifts stabilize the host. When unsupported, they prioritize survival over cooperation. Understanding this shifts responsibility away from punishment and toward care. Care is not softness, it is precision. Precision in providing the conditions systems need to function. This precision is difficult in environments that value speed and output above all else. But difficulty does not negate necessity. The microbiome does not negotiate necessity. It responds to it. As this exploration reaches its close, there is no final insight meant to inspire awe or promise transformation. There is a quieter conclusion. The body is not an obstacle to be conquered. The mind is not an island. The microbiome is not an invader. All are parts of a single adaptive system navigating a demanding environment. Health, in this context, is not perfection. It is the ability to continue, imperfectly, flexibly, and without constant internal conflict. The microbiome contributes to this ability by regulating thresholds, supporting recovery, and maintaining coherence. Coherence is not happiness, it is stability under fluctuation. Within stability, life becomes workable. Workable is enough. Enough to engage, enough to endure, enough to grow. The microbiome does not offer answers to existential questions. It offers a framework within which those questions can be held without overwhelming the system that must carry them. That, in itself, is a profound contribution, not because it changes who humans are, but because it clarifies how humans survive, adapt, and persist, quietly, cooperatively, and through countless invisible adjustments that make thinking, feeling, and choosing possible at all. As this journey reaches its true conclusion, the microbiome no longer stands as a subject to be examined, explained, or even emphasized. It recedes into something more subtle and more enduring, a background reality that reshapes how everything else is understood. What remains is not a theory, but a way of seeing. The most important realization is not that microbes influence the brain, or that the gut communicates with the nervous system. Those are facts. The deeper realization is that human life was never meant to be understood through isolation, not of organs, not of behaviors, and not of individuals. The microbiome exposes a truth that was always present but rarely acknowledged. Living systems survive through cooperation, not dominance. For much of modern history, progress was framed as control over nature, control over the body, control over emotion, productivity, and outcome. This framing produced extraordinary achievements, but it also produced a quiet misunderstanding. That stability comes from force rather than balance. The microbiome contradicts this at every level. It does not respond to force. It does not reward intensity. It does not bend to urgency. It responds to conditions. And conditions, unlike commands, cannot be imposed instantly. They must be cultivated. This distinction changes everything. It changes how health is pursued. It changes how struggle is interpreted. It changes how responsibility is understood. Health becomes less about fixing what is wrong and more about sustaining what allows systems to function. Struggle becomes less about personal failure and more about cumulative strain. Responsibility becomes less about blame and more about stewardship. Stewardship is an unfamiliar concept in cultures that value mastery, but stewardship is how ecosystems endure. The microbiome is an ecosystem. The body is an ecosystem. Human life itself is an ecosystem nested within larger ones. Once this is recognized, many false conflicts dissolve. Mind versus body dissolves into regulation across levels. Discipline versus compassion dissolves into capacity and response. Strength versus weakness dissolves into resilience and depletion. These dissolutions do not make life simpler, they make it accurate. Accuracy matters because it determines where effort is placed. When effort is directed at the wrong level, forcing motivation when capacity is depleted, demanding clarity when regulation is lost, suppressing symptoms when causes persist, frustration grows, systems resist. Outcomes worsen. When effort aligns with system needs, resistance decreases. Regulation returns, complexity becomes manageable. The microbiome teaches this alignment without ideology. It does not care about beliefs. It does not respond to narratives, it responds to rhythms, resources, and recovery. This makes it an uncompromising teacher. It reveals that time is not an obstacle to healing. Time is the medium through which healing occurs. Without time, systems cannot integrate change. Without integration, improvement collapses into rebound. This is why so many attempts at change fail, not because they are wrong, but because they are rushed. The microbiome cannot be rushed. It forces realism. Realism is often mistaken for pessimism. In truth, realism is what allows hope to be sustainable. Hope, detached from biology, becomes brittle. Hope, grounded in system capacity, becomes durable. Durable hope does not promise transformation, it promises continuity. Continuity is underrated. Continuity is what allows growth to occur gradually, without collapse. It is what allows people to continue functioning while adapting. It is what prevents struggle from turning into breakdown. The microbiome contributes to continuity by stabilizing internal environments. When environments are stable, systems can allocate energy toward repair rather than defense. When systems are constantly defending, nothing else progresses. This is why safety, biological safety, is foundational. Safety is not comfort. Safety is predictability, predictable nourishment, predictable rest, predictable recovery after stress. These signals tell the system that it can stand down from constant vigilance. When vigilance decreases, flexibility returns. Flexibility is the real marker of health. Healthy systems are not those that never fluctuate. They are those that can fluctuate without becoming trapped. They move through stress and return. They bend and rebound. The microbiome influences how wide this range is. This understanding reframes resilience. Resilience is not endurance without rest. It is recovery after strain. Recovery requires conditions. Ignoring those conditions turns resilience into exhaustion. The microbiome prevents that confusion by making exhaustion unavoidable when recovery is denied. This is not cruelty, it is protection. It protects the system from destroying itself in pursuit of impossible expectations. Understanding this shifts how people relate to limits. Limits are often treated as failures. Biology treats limits as signals. Signals are not enemies. They are information. Information allows adjustment. Adjustment restores balance. Balance allows continuation. This sequence is not philosophical, it is physiological. The microbiome operates within it constantly. Once this is understood, many struggles lose their moral charge. Fatigue is no longer laziness. Emotional volatility is no longer weakness. Difficulty concentrating is no longer incompetence. These experiences become what they always were, indicators of system state. Indicators do not require punishment, they require response. Response does not always mean intervention. Sometimes it means reduction, less stimulation, less pressure, less demand. Reduction is often misunderstood as retreat. In biological terms, reduction is recalibration. Recalibration is necessary for long-term function. The microbiome recalibrates continuously. It shifts composition in response to resources. It reallocates effort in response to stress. It adapts slowly, conservatively, and with memory. That memory is important. The microbiome remembers patterns long after conscious awareness has moved on. This is why repeated strain leaves lasting effects. This is also why repeated care leaves lasting benefits. Nothing is erased, everything accumulates. This is not destiny. Accumulation can move in both directions. Understanding this restores agency, not as control over outcomes, but as influence over trajectories. You may not be able to change how you feel today. You can change what your system receives consistently. Consistency compounds. The microbiome is living proof of compounding effects. Tiny shifts repeated over time reshape the entire internal landscape. This is not exciting advice. It is effective advice. Effectiveness matters more than excitement. The microbiome strips away fantasies of instant optimization and replaces them with something quieter: sustainability. Sustainability is not stagnation. It is growth that does not require collapse. Collapse is dramatic. Sustainability is invisible. But sustainability is what allows lives to be lived rather than endured. This perspective also reshapes how meaning is approached. Meaning is often sought through intensity, peak experiences, radical change, transcendence. But meaning requires capacity to be felt. When systems are dysregulated, meaning feels inaccessible regardless of circumstances. Restoring regulation often restores meaning without changing external conditions. This does not trivialize existential questions. It explains why they feel unbearable at some times and manageable at others. Meaning is processed biologically. The microbiome contributes to that processing by stabilizing the system that must hold meaning. This does not make meaning mechanical, it makes it possible. The final insight, then, is not about microbes at all. It is about humility. Humility before complexity. Humility before limits. Humility before the fact that humans are not isolated minds directing passive bodies, but living systems shaped by cooperation at every level. This humility does not weaken human dignity, it strengthens it. Dignity does not come from pretending to be independent of biology. It comes from living wisely within it. The microbiome invites this wisdom without demanding belief. It simply responds. If care is present, balance improves. If care is absent, strain accumulates. There is no judgment in this process, only consequence. Consequences are not punishments. They are feedback. Feedback allows learning. Learning allows adaptation. Adaptation is how life persists. This is the quiet conclusion the microbiome offers. Not a command, not a cure, not a philosophy, a framework. A framework in which struggle is intelligible, health is contextual, and change is possible without violence towards oneself. Once this framework is internalized, the relationship with the body shifts. The body stops being an adversary. It becomes a signal-rich environment that can be listened to rather than dominated. Listening does not mean obeying every impulse. It means interpreting signals before overriding them. This interpretation is the difference between care and control. Control exhausts systems. Care sustains them. The microbiome has always operated on care, whether acknowledged or not. Now that it is understood, the choice becomes visible. Not the choice to optimize, the choice to cooperate. Cooperation does not guarantee ease, it guarantees viability. Viability is enough. Enough to think, enough to feel, enough to choose, enough to continue. In a world that demands more than biology can sustainably give, enough is not a compromise. It is a success. The microbiome does not change what it means to be human. It reminds us how humans have always survived through balance, adaptation, and countless invisible partnerships that make consciousness possible without ever asking for recognition. In its place appears something quieter and more durable: respect. And respect in living systems is not an abstract virtue. It is the condition under which life keeps going.